The Liberals and the NDP will be trading the usual convention floor this weekend for the pandemic alternative. Both parties are hosting virtual conventions, their first since before the last federal election. This time, it's an opportunity to frame their message ahead of the next election. And who will be delivering that message matters, as does what policies will be up for debate. But for the NDP, there's more. Its leader's popularity will also be put to the test. So how will leaders and their parties make their pitches? It's Thursday. You know what that means. I'm here with At Issue, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. All join me. Good to see all of you. Normally, this would be a really busy weekend for all of us. You all might be here. We all might be meeting with people and talking to people and trying to get a sense of how things are going to unfold. That's not what's going to happen this weekend. Let's start with the Liberal convention. They've got some big ticket names giving speeches. They seem to be focused on getting things ready for an election they say they don't want. Althea, I'll start with you. What are you expecting to come from this, other than, we'll see whether anyone watches it?
Sadly, I don't expect lots of drama coming out of the Liberal convention. Most of the policy conventions are the resolutions are not shocking. The party wants to come out of this, obviously, with this idea that they're still a progressive party, that they're election ready, that they cared for people during the pandemic, that they're best place to guide the recovery from the pandemic and the crisis we've just gone through. I think all eyes are going to be on Carney on Friday. He has not declared that he is running as a Liberal candidate. Lots of Liberals hope that he will declare that he is running as a candidate. If we look back in the past, the policy convention is a great place where the Liberals like to showcase stars like Jody Wilson-Raybould and Harjit Sajjan and Andrew Leslie. And so it's, it may not be in the cards for the coming months if there's an election, say, but down the line, very possibly. I think the other thing we might be looking at this convention with the Liberals is whatever Mr. Carney says on Friday will be compared to what is in Chrystia Freeland's budget. Mm-hmm. So I know that Ms. Freeland's a little bit nervous, and apparently she's been making calls to Mr. Carney to make sure that they're all singing from the same songbook. So, but as far as big drama, I think that might be more the case for the NDP convention, where there tends to be more disagreement.
Yes, and we will certainly get to that. You're right. There may be more flare-ups there. The Liberals have done a pretty good job, Chantal, of trying to make sure that this comes off pretty clean, I would say. And yes, Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, who's written a book. He is trying to sell a book, so maybe he's not looking for another job, but he is one of the keynotes on Friday. What are you expecting to come out of all this?
Well, one thing you have to say about party members who will spend a sunny weekend in the spring watching a convention is that they tend to be political junkies. Yeah. And the Liberal Party, in two ways, is kind of provided enough of a fix, I think, to keep them interested. And one of those is Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, and the notion that they have people like that maybe in the political or the leadership window. I think the other wise thing is all the focus on the election preparation, mm-hmm. not because it's going to be terribly useful to all those people who are watching, but because it focuses minds on the big prize, which is a possible upcoming election, no time to rock the boat and mess up. And then it's almost cruel to say that, but the low bar on a non-successful convention is being set by the Conservatives already, and it's impossible for either the NDP or the Liberals to do worse this weekend. That's my bold prediction than the Conservatives did a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, Andrew, with that low bar in place, what would you expect to emerge?
I think even by Liberal standards, this will be a party in the grips of an almost paralytic self-satisfaction. They're happy with their lot in life. They're happy with what they stand for. They're happy with their leader. Not a lot of rocking of the boat is going to happen. Much of this is going to be internal party matters of preparing for the election that they claim they don't want. And there's a lot of preparation going on for that election that isn't supposed to be happening. But to be fair to them, there's also a fair degree of confidence and exuberance in the policy platform. And we're all talking about how boring and dull it is, perhaps by the standards of the NDP platform or the NDP policy discussions. But, you know, a basic income used to be considered a pretty radical idea. There's I'm not saying all these are good ideas. There's a resolution in there to build a high-speed rail line all the way across the country, which is, you know, clinically insane as an idea. It would cost, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars. But you got to give them credit, and comparing both the Liberal and the NDP resolutions to what went on at the Conservative convention. We're talking about what a bust that convention was, because all the focus was on that one resolution about whether or not climate change was real. Well, the reason there was so much focus on it was there was so little else to discuss in the resolutions they were talking about. Conservatives have so lost their way and lost their self-confidence, and it's a striking contrast to both the parties of the left in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you can criticize what's there, but I think you're right. They are kind of bold ideas that may shake people up. Let me play a little clip of the NDP leader who spoke to Vashi Kapillas on PNP tonight ahead of his convention. Here's what he had to say.
We can show folks when it comes down to it, when people were down and out, having New Democrats elected made people better off. It meant millions of Canadians were better off. And I want to make that case to Canadians to let them know the Liberals weren't on their side.
So I should say he does have a leadership review. That's something that they have to do. Everyone I talk to, Althea says it's not going to be an issue. They're launching some big ads this weekend. What do they have to do here to make sure they aren't sort of lost in the shuffle, or that some of those policies that we were talking about, proposals or resolutions, don't cause all sorts of chaos for the party?
Well, I should say that one of the great things about these two parties, I think, is that they have allowed their members to vote democratically on ranking these resolutions. So the entire, like, if you're a registered Liberal, you could have voted on this. If you're a registered New Democrat, you could have ranked these, as opposed to the Conservatives, where only the ADAs got votes. So it's great that there is a ranking of these votes from general members. That being said, I don't know what NDP resolutions at this time have passed the vote that happened on Wednesday. So there are things like getting rid of all billionaires, you know, taxing them at 100% past the $1 billion mark. I'm told that the party is not dissatisfied from the top 5 resolutions. That's just before we recorded this. That was what I was told the party only knew at this point. So could there be more things in there that cause them problems? Absolutely. There is always the Israel-Palestine issue, usually bumbling up on the floor of the NDP convention. There's a resolution regarding the word socialism, which caused a great deal of debate over the last 3 NDP conventions. But now, democratic socialism is like this cool new word, thanks to Bernie Sanders. I mean, they could sell T-shirts with this on it. So, you know, over time, the crises don't seem as relevant as the public moves in one direction. And this tax the rich and nationalize everything, that the bent that the NDP is on, actually rings, I think, true for a lot of people at this point because of the pandemic. Jagmeet Singh got 90.7% in 2018, last time he got a vote. If the vote had happened last year, I think he may have gotten a lower vote than what he is going to get this weekend, because a lot of Quebec MPs and Quebec party members are very disappointed with the last election result. That is not the case now. People are, you know, seeing how great he's doing in the polls, his personal popularity. So actually, I expect him to do better than what he got in 2018.
Okay, but Chantal, the fact remains that the party's not, they like to say they're doing okay in the polls, but they're doing okay for the NDP. They are not competitive.
Excuse me, but they're doing okay for the NDP by comparison to how they were doing as the NDP just a few years ago?
Yes, exactly.
No, they're not. And if those battles do not seem as relevant as they were over 3 conventions, it's because the NDP is no longer on what looks like a track to federal power. Yeah. So if they were where the Conservatives are, we would be saying this is a show that demonstrates that they're not ready for prime time, except that the polls show that they're not headed for prime time. So it doesn't really matter whether they agree or not. So it's not just Bernie Sanders made this sexy. It's that they have become not less relevant to the conversation, because I believe that all parties, whether they're third parties, fourth parties, or headed for power, are relevant to the conversation. But they are not going to be judged by the standard of a party that may become the next government, and that does not speak well. I know that there are New Democrats who think that's great, it means they're pure. I think that speaks to decline. And I agree with Althea. I think they will and should at this point be happy with their leader, because the last time they decided they weren't happy with their leader, they traded down in the polls.
Andrew, your thoughts on what Mr. Singh has to do or what the party has to indicate after the weekend?
Yeah. Well, we shouldn't overstate the significance, for good or ill, of what gets adopted at policy conventions of the broad party. What will really matter in terms of the voting public is what finds its way into the platform, and in all of those parties, the leadership has virtually total control of that. I think these function more or less the way that runway fashion shows do, where you see things that no one's ever going to wear, but they kind of soften the public up for less radical versions of it. So if I were the NDP, yeah, there's the odd resolution there to make it illegal to be a billionaire, or to disband the army, or to nationalize the auto industry, the energy industry, and about 4 or 5 other industries. It's not going to be in the platform, but it allows them to kind of exercise their energies and to get a sense of their broader simpatico with each other, that it creates unity in the party much more than the divisions over particular issues. Yeah. It gets them feeling that they're part of a larger cause. The other thing I would say is, the outlier clauses in resolutions in the policy platform, policy resolutions of the NDP are a bit out there, but there's much more in common between the Liberal and the NDP here. It's quite striking how similar some of their broad policy proposals are. And they've become almost in kind of a bidding war between the two of them. And again, I'll say, if the Conservatives were anywhere in this game, they could capitalize on that. But they're not in position to do so. You'd think they'd be able to move into the center and take up the space the Liberals have been vacating, but I don't see any sign of it.
This panel was a win because Andrew talked about fashion shows and Chantal said sexy. So that's it. I'm done for the whole night. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
We're taking the approach that as we saw the ICU capacity grow, as we saw this variant move, it was different than the experts told me last week. It's simple as that. And as it excelled, and we got the call yesterday saying, hey, it's going quicker than expected, you have to be nimble, you have to be quick. I was decisive immediately. I said, start writing the orders.
That was Ontario Premier Doug Ford on Wednesday, speaking about when he officially announced the stay-at-home order across the province of Ontario, just one of several provinces dealing with increased restrictions because of the spread of COVID and the variants, pressured in large part by the public, obviously, but also by the medical community and public health professionals to respond, to step up their response. Let's go back for one more round of At Issue. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. I'll start with you on this one, Chantal. I should say that what Mr. Ford, Premier Ford, said there is not actually accurate, that's not what the modeling showed that this was going to happen. Do you think that we are in a sort of like a crisis point where it does seem as though health officials, public health officials, local health officials are having to put so much pressure on politicians, provincial politicians, to respond? It's not just Premier Ford. It's also happened in Alberta and other places. Should that be where the pressure is coming from?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. It is not happening in every province. No. And for sure, it's clear that collectively, though, premiers expected that the vaccine race versus variants would turn out in some other way, which it did not. And we don't know how it will turn out. We won't know for another number of weeks. But you can see that parties whose members expected that we would be opening up at this point rather than shutting down again are struggling more than parties like the NDP in BC or the Coalition Avenir Québec here. I'm looking at what's happening to Premier Kenney in Alberta with what 1/4 of his caucus writing an open letter to protest this latest measures. But that does give you a sense of the skepticism that the public is feeling towards ever-changing recommendations and orders from all governments. And I think the way out of this for any province is still the same as last week, and it is vaccinate as much as you can, as quickly as you can.
Andrew, is it ideologically driven then? The premiers that are unwilling to, hit the hammer as hard as they can the first time and then have to be pressured? I mean, just days later, Premier Ford changed his mind on what had to happen.
I don't think it's ideologically driven at the premier level. I think these are practical politicians who are weighing the pressures on them in various directions, pressures from the business community, quite understandable pressures also from the medical community, and also understandable and welcome. I think there are, however, ideologues within some of the party, particularly in the conservative side, who have propagating the idea that we don't have to do this, that lockdowns are unnecessary or indeed harmful, that there's an easy way out, though they don't necessarily want to tell us what that is. The easy way out that the practical politicians were hoping for was, as Chantal mentioned, that the vaccines were going to arrive here in time to defeat the variants. I think that was wishful thinking at best, and that's where you get into trouble, is when you raise expectations that you can't deliver on, and when you base policy on the best possible thing happening rather than planning for a much less good thing happening. And I think that's where they're starting to hit real turbulence with the public.
I say ideological in some ways because, Althea, it does seem like, at least from the Ford government and Kenney's government in Alberta, that there continues to be a lot of talk about personal freedoms. And while I understand that and I respect that, at some point that shouldn't be, I don't think, what drives your response to a public health crisis.
I don't think it's the same thing in Ontario as in Alberta. I think, yes, I think Premier Kenney, he talks a lot in his press conferences about how this is a great toll on him in terms of that language. Yeah. Premier Ford talks about it more in terms of shutting down the small businesses and how much that hurts him. But I think, what these premiers, and frankly, many of the other premiers across the country, I'm just hearing Premier Legault today, they are not trying to kill the virus. They are just trying to live with the virus. And the wishful thinking that Andrew speaks of, that is their policy. It is, we're going to cross our fingers and hope for the best. And until the evidence comes forward that actually you have to move now, because you should have moved last week, but you were unwilling to take the measures required last week because, the numbers of infections in schools were not quite high, or the ICU was not completely overloaded. So it's only when they are absolutely forced to act that they have acted. And it's had, but I'm thankful for the medical professionals, especially a lot of doctors around the Toronto area, who have spoken out and said, this is what is happening inside our hospitals, because, we basically, legislatures are shut down. The opposition is across the country, doesn't seem to be playing a role. The media, we are not experts. These people are our soldiers on the front lines, and they are saying what they're experiencing. And we would not have that information if they did not have the guts to come out and tell us what's happening. And frankly, in many cases, I'm not sure the premiers would have acted if it wasn't for those voices telling the public what is happening.
Chantal, you wanted in there?
Yes, except that in my province, I heard the chief medical officer, or whatever the title is here, a week ago, assure that everything was under control and things were looking up. So I'm not willing to put on politicians the entire blame for what they are being told by their own public health experts. And I do note that, yes, there is some pressure coming from the medical community, but if you listen carefully, for instance, on school closings or not, elementary schools, you will not hear a unanimous sound, and that's okay. But premiers are also hearing a variety of voices from that side. It's not as if someone sits there and says, we have the wisdom, and we all agree that that's the wisdom, and just take it to the people. It's slightly more complicated. The other issue is, and it goes back not just to Jason Kenney, at some point you need people to continue to follow you if you're the political leader.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, it's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah. If you're going to get them to follow, though, it helps if you lead. I think too many of the premiers have been going no faster than they think the public is going on this. And I understand that, both from political reasons and also because you want to get buy-in. You don't want to have people just not complying with it. But if people in positions of leadership don't get out in front and take the risk of doing so, risking their personal popularity, among other things, then, you know, or let's put it this way, if they had, we'd be in a lot better position. And Exhibit A for that would be the Atlantic provinces, where the premiers took much tougher measures. And I don't notice that they paid a huge price for it politically. I think people actually in Atlantic Canada are looking at this as being a relative success story.
The last word to you, Althea, on that.
Yeah, I would say because in some ways the benchmarks are different. In Atlantic Canada, they have gone with eradicating the virus. Let's try to shut things down completely so we can get rid of this and start leading normal lives. Whereas everybody else seems to be going with the let's learn to live with it until we can't live with it anymore, and then pause and then try to live with it again, which is what is leading to where we are now.
I'm just not sure that what fits for PEI fits for Ontario, but that's just me.
Okay, I got to leave it there. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
You too.
You too.